I'm with Professor Sarah Vickerstaff, who's Professor of Worker Deployment at the University of Kent, an particular expert on age and employment issues, who's just done a presentation at the conference. And we wanted to follow up with a few additional questions. So, Sarah, could I start by asking you to give us a quick rundown of the main conclusions of the presentation you gave based on the work you've been doing?
Yes, I was looking at how older workers have been affected by previous recessions and whether we could learn anything from that as to what might be happening at the present time. And what we can see is that at the early stage of a recession, it's younger workers that are hit first, and that's because firms introduce recruitment freezes. So people who are outside the labour market are disproportionately affected. But then as a recession deepens, and even once an economy starts to turn up, employment lags behind, so you have to be very careful not to imagine that slightly better economic prospects will mean good things in the labour market. That as a recession deepens, then redundancies start to kick in, and that's when older workers are affected. Now, in the past, recessions in the 1980s and the 1990s, you saw that redundancies were particularly concentrated in certain regions in the country, in the northwest, in the West Midlands where we are, and also in particular sectors, so manufacturing, construction, particularly badly hit. And those were industries, of course, where you had quite a lot of relatively highly skilled men. And they were made redundant, came out of employment, and in the previous recessions typically expected to get back to work, but didn't find work sort of within a year or so of being made redundant, and then were often redefined either by themselves as having retired if they were in their late 50s, or for quite a lot they shifted from being job seekers to people on incapacity benefit, because often having worked for 35 years in industry, they had back problems or they had other health issues, and a lot moved on to incapacity benefit. So when we're looking at what happens in a recession, we have to look at unemployment figures, that's important obviously, but we always have to keep an eye as well on those incapacity rates and on inactivity rates. Are older workers coming out and defining themselves as retired sooner than they otherwise would have, or are they coming out and then being redefined as unable to work? And it's too early really at the moment to tell quite what's going to happen there. But I think in terms of retirement, that what we saw in sectors like the public sector in the 90s was a lot of people coming out under early retirement deals, packages. It was a way for the public sector to shed labour in an apparently honourable way. People could go with respect, they could go with a deal, and that sort of seemed a reasonable and decent solution for everybody. It reduced the head count for the employer, and someone went off with a decent retirement package. Now, the cost of that, of course, was horrendous in the police force, in local government, in the NHS, and there simply isn't the money to do that this time round. So it really is an open question at the moment as to what's going to happen there. Will those older workers stay in because the retirement packages aren't there? What will that mean? And then I pose this point, which I think is very important, and that is, what will older workers themselves feel about this? Will they feel under some kind of moral pressure, or perhaps actual pressure, to go because they're older and to keep a place for a younger worker? I've certainly interviewed lots of people in the past in research projects over 50 who will say, well, I suppose if it came down to it and there were job losses here, I'm 57, I think probably I should go, and the 39-year-old with a family and a mortgage and all the rest should stay. So we don't know whether that's going to happen. The age regulations are there now. There's much more discussion about age discrimination. So I think older workers are more likely to sort of feel they can stand up for their rights. But I think that kind of moral pressure in an organisation might be very significant.
So the figures at the moment then suggest that younger people are disproportionately hit by the recession, but what you're saying is previous experience suggests actually we shouldn't be complacent about older workers. There's going to be a lag, and that history suggests that's what happens. And that not only that the measures that were previously available to help that older group simply aren't there. So actually it will come, and actually it's going to be impacting even more on older workers than it did in previous recessions? Is that what
I
you
don't
expect
know
to
that it
happen?
will impact even more. We can't judge that.
We don't know yet.
We don't know. But I think if you think of this idea of an anatomy of a recession, that different things happen at different times. First of all, there's a job freeze. Employers stop recruiting people. So that affects anyone who's not in employment. Then if the recession deepens and carries on biting, then people start to be shed. There's redundancies, and that's when older age groups are likely to come in. And I think the big question now in this recession is what's going to happen in the public sector. The public sector is an employer of a lot of older workers in education, in my sector, in local government, in the health service. You've got an older profile of workers. So all of the public sector is coming under a squeeze. We're going to expect quite dramatic job cuts. Now, there's not going to be the pension packages that there were. So what's going to happen there? I think in the next 18 months to 2 years, we'll see a lot of older workers. And, of course, women will be disproportionately affected because older women workers are a big group in local government, in health service, education, will start to be affected by redundancies. And they won't be offered retirement packages. So will they come out and what will they do? Will they go on to unemployment and seek another job? Or will they define themselves as perhaps having retired earlier than they thought? Or what? We don't know.
Do you detect any attention being paid by the public sector to this as a coming issue? We're about to hear from employers in here, and there's a lot of focus on the private sector and its response to this age group. Do you notice any similar things happening in the public sector?
I don't think so. I think a lot of organisations don't really profile their workforces. They may have a sort of common sense idea that actually it's a rather older workforce perhaps than other organisations. But when I go in and I ask all sorts of employers about their age policies, it's typical for them not to know what the age distribution of their workforce is. And arguably, if you don't know what the age distribution of your workforce is, you can't possibly be thinking sensibly about what you might do about it. So if they haven't even made that first step, then they're not in a position to think in any way strategically about how to manage job losses. My guess is that a lot of employers will think, well, there's those age regulations, so we can't actually target older workers as we might have done in the past, actively or openly, but we can still do it through sort of moral persuasion.
Moral pressure, yes.
And that's the big thing that we don't know. What protection the age regulations will afford to older workers who feel they're coming under pressure to, quote-unquote, voluntarily take redundancy or voluntarily retire early. From previous recessions, there were plenty of older workers who felt pushed out, but who would have been defined in any figures as having taken early retirement or as having voluntarily taken redundancy. When you talk to them, they actually felt they were under pressure to go, and it wasn't really a choice. I would expect that to happen again.
For people that are involved with the responsibility for trying to do something about this, and particularly thinking about the European Social Fund, for people who are perhaps framing the policies and the priorities of the programme, or those that are trying to come up with practical solutions, on the basis of what you know, what are the sorts of things you think they should be looking at if they're interested in?
Well, I think we need to improve awareness of the age regulations, and that's both with employers and employees. I've certainly interviewed quite a lot of older workers who are very confused about what the age regulations entail. So I think we do need to keep having a debate whenever people talk about the young unemployed, which are extremely important. We have to say, but let's not forget the older unemployed. Let's not forget the people who perhaps are retiring earlier. So I think we need to raise awareness. And then I think we really need to focus on trying to keep people who are in employment because once an older worker comes out of work, it's much more difficult for them to get back in. And in a recession, it will be very, very difficult to get back in. So focus on retention. And then I think for the people outside who want to get back into work, in many ways for the older workers, it's the same old issues. It's health. That's a problem whether we're in a recession or not. That whatever those figures were I was showing, something like 48% of men who are inactive say that it's due to long-term sickness and health. That's a huge figure. So enabling people to manage health conditions, encouraging, helping employers to think through, okay, what could we do to accommodate this person who's got arthritis but actually can still do the job, or this person who's got back issues but perhaps with slight modifications can nevertheless carry on, or perhaps with a slight reduction of hours will be able to cope better. So I think we need to focus, and then the caring responsibilities as well. A lot of people, 3 million or so people in this country, work and spend a considerable amount of time caring for an elderly relative or a sick partner or a sick child. And they do that under a tremendous strain, managing to their caring responsibilities and their employment. Again, that's true whether we're in a recession or not. So better policies for carers. Lots of organisations are blissfully unaware of how many carers they employ. And it's not that they're not willing to do anything about them, they just simply don't know that they're there. So lots of, sounds rather weak, awareness raising, but I think we have to keep reminding people that actually a lot of the workforce is not this mythical 25 to 45-year-old fit, hits the ground running person, that actually most of us have children, or we have elderly parents, we might have a slightly dodgy back. Actually most of us are not that sort of prime age, completely fit person, and the demographic trends mean that actually employers increasingly will have workforces of older people with health issues, with caring responsibilities, and they need to start putting in place the flexible work options, etc., that those people need.
And for people who want to understand the demographics, the age profile of the area that they work in, perhaps where different people of different ages are employed and so on, what are the best sources of information for that?
Well, the ONS, the Office of National Statistics, has very good regional and neighbourhood even statistics. So you can drill down to look at the profile. You can drill down and look at how things like the numbers of people on incapacity benefit are very, very concentrated in particular areas, unemployment. So, there are good figures. Local councils should also have information on that. But the Office for National Statistics website, ONS, lots of labour market information, and it's reasonably easy to digest. I mean, you can go into it and sort of do some sophisticated statistical stuff if you want, but it's pretty intelligible. You don't have to be an expert. It'll give you a profile of your local area and what the issues are.
Great. Sarah, thank you very much for your time. Good luck with the continuing work, and I'm sure people will be very interested to follow up on the University of Kent website to find out more about your work, which I'm sure is available there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.